Hey folks, this is Demeere here in the podcast episode, and I am very fortunate to have an awesome guest. I've got Mike Janich here with me. Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Wim?
I'm really well. It's a snowy day in Belgium. You're in another part of the world where snow is actually a little bit more impressive than it is over here. So I hope you're doing fine on that front.
We don't have snow today. So.
But Colorado weather is funky like that. I mean, it can go either way in like a 15-minute period.
Yeah, we have big fluctuations as far as temperature and everything, and it's weird. You could have snow one day and 60 degrees the next day. So
okay, so let's get something straight right away. So how do you pronounce your name? Because I want to say it in German, Janich. But what do you prefer?
Traditional. So the name itself is Serbian.
Okay.
So when you go back on my father's side of the family, Janich would be the traditional pronunciation, but very few people know that. Very few people are that culturally aware. So usually it just comes off as Janich, but I've been called much worse. So please feel free to call me Janich, whatever you like. Just call me Mike.
Okay. Well, this is coming from a guy whose name everybody mispronounces also. So I'm always curious to know what people like to be called. It's always easier.
I appreciate your knowledge of the linguistic side.
Well, you're quite a linguist yourself, and we're going to get into that a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your background first, Mike, if that's okay. And if you could fill in, I mean, you've got obviously decades of martial arts training, but also you were in the army. As an intelligence officer, I mean, loads and loads of stuff. Let's maybe start with the martial arts background first. Could you just give a little bit of an overview?
Sure. So I got interested in the martial arts early 1970s. So it was the Bruce Lee era. So when Bruce Lee was first coming to popularity, so it was culturally, it was an interesting thing. But also where I lived, I was just barely outside the Chicago city limits in a suburb called Cicero. It was kind of a grungy area, and there was a fair amount of crime there. So having self-defense skills was a handy thing. So both from kind of a need standpoint and also a point of interest as far as what was going on, culturally at the time, and everything was something that fascinated me. We didn't have enough money for me to start training martial arts. There wasn't a whole lot available at the time. So I started reading books and magazines and everything else, and actually started off boxing. So boxing classes were the cheapest, and boxed for about a year and a half. I was a former Golden Gloves boxer who was teaching at the YMCA. So started off with that. And then I saw that there was a martial arts club at the high school that I was going to be going to. There was an article in the newspaper, and I contacted the instructor who was in charge of the club. And he said, you don't have to wait until you get into high school. There's actually we have a storefront dojo. So it's nothing fancy, but we do run it as a commercial club, and you're welcome to come down. And it was for a system called American Self-Protection. So it was a system developed by a guy named Evan S. Baltazzi. And he was basically, what he did was, it was a kind of a composite system that included elements of judo, aikido, savate, and Western boxing. And it was kind of his fusion of those different systems into a more Americanized self-defense system. And started training in that system. It was very affordable, which was great for me. But also the instructors, what was great was we had a lot of people from traditional martial arts who kind of got disillusioned with the Asian model and the politics that went along with it. So having an American art that was not quite as politically structured and everything, and just focused more on the training aspect, was something that drew some people to the system. So we had people who were black belts in Taekwondo and Kyokushinkai and Judo, Jiu-Jitsu. We had a number of different senior instructors who had great backgrounds in other martial arts. And what was cool was we would typically do a training session, and we'd do the ASP part of it, the American Self-Protection part. And then typically the last half hour or so, one of these instructors would get up and say, hey, let me show you some cool stuff that I learned from whatever, Aikido, Taekwondo, whatever it might be. So it's a really great way to get exposed to a lot of different arts without having the strict regimen around them that kind of existed at that time. So that was kind of how I got started. Joined the Army when I was 17, and basically left Chicago and went off and did my Army career, and literally any military post you go to, there's going to be somebody doing martial arts, somebody training, somebody teaching, somebody doing something. So you go down to the post gym, you'll find somebody there doing martial arts, and it's like, hey, you want to work out, you want to do something. And ended up getting a lot of great training with a lot of different people, again, without a lot of the formal structure around it. So you can kind of make friends with somebody and they say, okay, this is what I cherry picked from this particular art. This is what I like best. Let me share it with you. And it was a great way to get exposed to a lot of great information without, again, having that narrow focus that you sometimes get when you train in a traditional system.
Right. So, and could you talk a little bit about your Filipino martial arts training?
So one of the things when I was first training in ASP, we were learning defenses against knives, and the techniques sucked. They just were not really good. And I complained to my instructor. I said, the knife is one of the things that scared me the most. And it was something I really wanted to be prepared for. And he said, well, if you want to learn how to defend against a weapon, learn how to use the weapon. I'm like, okay, great. So I started researching knife fighting. He was a former Army Ranger, so he taught us a little bit of stuff. There were a couple other people in the class who were also interested in knife tactics and knife self-defense. So we started looking into all that stuff. And one of the things, again, this was mid-1970s, the Filipino martial arts really had not come into the public eye as far as the martial arts world. And toward the late 1970s, early 1980s, that's when you started to see, Daniel Santo doing the Filipino martial arts, started to see Leo Kahe, started to see some of the visibility of the Filipino arts. And everyone said, their knife techniques are awesome. So obviously I wanted to find a source for the Filipino martial arts. I was actually stationed in Hawaii for a while, large Filipino population there. So I went to the Filipino Chamber of Commerce, where you had all the businessmen and kind of the social community and everything. And I started asking around about Filipino martial arts training. They gave me some names of some instructors, but once they heard my name, they're like, wait, you're not Filipino. We're not going to teach you. So something that they kept very much within their culture. I finally found one guy, Raymond Tabosa, who was willing to take me on as a student. And I said, Mr. Tabosa, I'm really interested in learning, knife technique. And he's like, no, I'll teach you stick. And it's like, well, knife is what I really want to learn. It's like, no, I teach you stick. So that's where I got my fundamentals as far as the Filipino martial arts. And what the Filipino arts always say is essentially the techniques, the movements, the mechanics are all the same. You simply adapt to the attributes of the weapon. So I was an intelligence analyst and linguist. I said, okay, I'm going to take my analytical skills, apply them to the stick technique, and I'm going to create knife technique that works for me. And that was kind of the way that I started off, was finding everything I could possibly find in the Filipino martial arts and then trying to distill that down into a knife system. And then years later, when I was able to get formal training in the Filipino martial arts, second time that I was stationed in Hawaii, I trained in Sarada, Eskrima. And then during my time with the Paladin, I had an opportunity to train with a number of different Filipino martial arts instructors. What it did was kind of validated what I'd come up with as far as the analytical process that kind of led me to the knife system. But had the opportunity to train. My Sarada instructor was John Lau, so he went from Angel Cabales to Jimmy Tacosa to John Lau as my instructor, so I trained with him in Hawaii. And then once I settled here in Colorado, trained with Bill Kipp. Bill is best known for fast defense, but Bill also trained with Remy Presa's nephew in the Philippines and is an instructor in Balintawak. So when I settled here, trained Arnice with Bill, and then through Paladin, had the opportunity to train with folks like Kelly Warden, James Keating, some very, very accomplished Filipino martial arts practitioners, and that's where I kind of rounded out my knowledge of things.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk about your own system in a little while, but I mean that's a quite obviously diverse background, and you've been training for many years. And I want to point this out to the listeners because I know many of them are a little bit younger than we are. There used to be a time before the internet. There used to be a time before YouTube, and back in the day, you basically were kind of like on your own to find good training material, whether it was teachers, books, or videos. I mean, I moved from my apartment a few months ago, and I was just surprised at how many old VHS tapes that I still had.
Yeah.
that people like my kids don't even know what a VHS tape is if I don't show it to them. So life was very different when we started our training. It was
Yeah.
very, very different. And a lot of people now talk about like the, reality-based self-defense and all that kind of stuff. Well, back in the day, there was no discussion. There was no real talk about reality, anything. It was just like, you want to train martial arts? Well, there's a guy who has a dojo over there. There's somebody over there with a boxing gym. That's it. You're done.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first started looking for formal martial arts training, there was one school in the town where I lived, and they taught Shotokan downstairs. They taught judo upstairs, and that was it.
Yeah.
It was all contract based. You go in and the contract immediately came out. It's like, you want to sign up for 2 years and a few $1,000s. And my dad was like, we're not doing that. And it was difficult. There wasn't much information out there. And it was also one of those things where, as I mentioned, when I was interested in the Filipino martial arts, there was something that wasn't shared outside of their culture. Yeah. It was one of the things where they considered it to be part of their cultural heritage, and they really didn't teach it to people who were non-Filipinos. And that was just a choice that they made culturally. And it's, people look at stuff these days and it's like, oh, I just get up on YouTube and do a search and I can see all the Filipino martial arts stuff I want. Like you said, it wasn't like that. And back in the day, like your collection, if you went back to your VHS video collection and added up all the money that you spent back in the currency of that time, people look at you like, you're crazy. Like,
yeah.
God, you spent a fortune on all this stuff. I'm the same way. The books behind me, that's, 40 years of collecting martial arts books. And people are like, God, you spent all that money. It's like, yeah, we were hungry for knowledge and it was hard to find.
Yeah. I think there's also, I've done a bunch of different martial arts and self-defense systems myself. And it's one of those things that I think is an inherent part of our path, just because there was such a lack of information available, is that you had to actively go out and look for it. And I remember buying books and videos and many times on anything that I could get my hands on, and then just start training by myself. Like, okay, how can I figure this out? And then grab a partner and let's see if this works. Like, no, this is total crap. Let's not ever do that again. Or like, holy crap, this is awesome. This works so well. I never thought about that. And it's a very different mindset from nowadays, where what you see now is people, like you said, is that they go on YouTube, they look something up and like, okay, I know this. No, you don't. You've never had to earn this. You know about it. You have some theoretical knowledge, but you didn't practice.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things when you look at comments on YouTube, people will be like, "Oh, this will never work," blah blah blah. And you get all these comments from these people who all they do is sit there and surf the internet. They don't get on the mat. They've never tried it.
Yeah.
Where we've looked at stuff and it's like, okay, I spent $50 on a VHS video. I'm going to try to get everything I possibly can out of it. So you watch it over and over and over again. You grab your buddies and you get out there and you try this stuff on the mat, and you really try to make it work, because you just spent $50 on a video.
Yeah.
That was a lot. And, you really put the effort forward before you decide, and you still, in a lot of cases, would end up disappointed. Hey, this doesn't work the way I want it to. But at least you gave it a fair try. You didn't simply watch it once and dismiss it. And people these days, because it's so accessible, because it's so easy to look at all this different stuff, they get very judgmental very quickly without ever giving anything a real hard try.
Yeah, and in my experience, I think that just having to go through that whole path forms your analytical mind more, because you have to analyze. There's no other choice. I'm sure, and we'll talk about Paladin Press, because you've got a lot of experience with making instructional videos too. I'm sure you can remember a bunch of videos where, like, I only wish they changed that camera angle so I can actually see what that other hand is doing, because it doesn't make any freaking sense. It's like, guys, and you try all sorts of stuff and it doesn't work because you really need that little bit of information and you don't get it. And there's your $50 right there.
Right. Yep. And the same thing when it comes to the instructor. You have people who are very talented martial artists who do not teach very well.
Yeah.
And the only way that they can teach effectively is if they're doing something hands-on with somebody else, where they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, or, they can take them and move them into position, they can make some kind of correction in person, but for them to teach in a video format, they just don't do it well. They don't explain things well. Their ability to really articulate what you're trying to do, they weren't good at it. But again, it was interesting also back in the day, because when you compare videos back then, very few people had the opportunity to make videos. So when you had, Panther Productions, you had Paladin Press, you had Black Belt Video, you had Unique Publications from Inside Kung Fu, ESPY. There were very few video producers out there who were specializing in martial arts stuff. So to be able to break into, that market where it's like, hey, they were willing to spend money to produce a video. That's one of the other things. People are editing videos on their phone, whereas back in the day, again, you had to spend tens of thousands of dollars to have an editing suite. And that investment meant that very few people had the opportunity. Now, if you got a smartphone, you've got a YouTube channel and you can shoot a video and edit it in your phone and put it up on YouTube. And people think, oh, this is easy. Back then, you're writing detailed outlines and you're making project proposals and everything. And, they're looking at it. The publishers are looking at it and saying, no, sorry, you're not worth it. Yep. And a lot of good instructors never had the opportunity. A lot of instructors who had the opportunity weren't very good. They just got lucky.
Yeah, it's a very strange world nowadays when you compare it to what it used to be, not even like 20 years ago. It was just radically different. It was very, very different. And I remember my first time at the Paladin Press Studios. I first met, I think it was Dave Dubrow, and blanking on a name right now because I'm getting old. And I had a pitch meeting first, and I did a proposal and everything, and then write the outline, like you said, and all that stuff. Spent a long time just on everything. And you know what it's like? You have an idea. Okay, I want to do a video about this. And then you have to write the outline, but just writing the outline means that you're just constantly practicing techniques like, okay, I would want this. When do I put that technique in? What do I explain first? Do I do first a theoretical explanation? Or do I do a demo first? What are the camera angles that I need to take into account? And you're just constantly going over to this massive amount of information in your head, trying to structure it in a way that, having gone through that experience of having seen crappy videos, that you don't want that. You want to have a good video that the viewer is happy. Again, because he's going to pay a fair amount of money for that. Right. It's not easy. People make it look easy.
Right. It's a difficult process. It really is.
If you've got a great team, you've got a good producer, editor, and you as an instructor know what you're doing, and then you got to find a good demo partner. It's also not easy. If everything comes together, it works out great, but that it's not standard. It's not a given. There's a fair amount of work involved.
Oh yeah.
Just going back a little bit to your background, with everything that you've done right now, what are you mostly training in at this stage?
What I train in primarily is martial blade concepts and its related systems. So could you talk a little bit about how that came about? Sure. So I've always trained in all different aspects of, empty hand stuff. The knife stuff, of course, was a very, very high priority for me. And that started off with kind of the counter knife interest. But where the martial blade concepts really kind of came about was training in the martial arts, learning the Filipino stuff. I was always fascinated with knives and, had been a knife collector since I was a kid. So the aspect of using knives, again, going back to my instructor's advice, if you want to learn how to defend against something, learn how to use the weapon. So started learning the knife use. And the deeper I dug into that, the more fascinated I was with it. Well, I did 9 years in the Army. So was stationed primarily in the U.S., in either mainland U.S. or Hawaii. But then toward the end of my tour, I had the opportunity to go to Bangkok and to do a 6-month temporary duty assignment there. And I was working primarily in Vietnamese refugee camps around Southeast Asia. And a lot of the camps were not just South Vietnamese refugees who had come out, but also North Vietnamese asylum seekers who were basically gangbangers who were trying to get out. They were either ethnic Chinese who had been purged out of Vietnam, or they were just gangbangers who were looking for a better opportunity. So there was a lot of violence in the camps. And one of the things that I looked at with that situation was I need to have some kind of a weapon that I could defend myself, because I'm working in all these camps by myself. I don't have any kind of security their security within the camp, but their response time to try to come and help me, it's ridiculous, you know. So the knife really became kind of a go-to weapon for me, and that became kind of the focus of what I wanted to do. And I put the most effort into developing the martial blade concept side of things. And essentially what it is the Filipino martial arts, taking what I distilled from that as far as technique, but then looking at it and saying, okay, I need to make sure that I can stop people as quickly as possible. So the stopping power versus the killing power of the technique, so that it's self-defense oriented. And then also making sure that it's consistent with modern legal considerations as far as self-defense. So a lot of the Filipino stuff, you'll see stuff where it's like, okay, this guy attacks me, and you know, I cut him, I disarm him, and then I kill him after I've disarmed. When you look at that from a self-defense standpoint, you started off okay, you know. Once you disarmed him, technically at that point you were safe, and you were no longer justified in using lethal force. But according to Filipino martial arts, the traditional martial arts approach, which is more battlefield oriented versus self-defense oriented, once you disarm him, then you kill him, because it's easy to kill when he doesn't have a weapon. You do that these days, you go to prison. So what martial blade concepts really became was kind of that, taking the Filipino martial arts and making it into a modern self-defense system. In the process, like you said, also making it so that it's easy to learn. It's something where there's no bullshit, there's no misinformation, there's no, you know, hey, if you're a good student, I'll teach you the secrets 5 years from now. What I wanted to do was be able to provide all the information up front. And that really became the primary focus of what I ended up teaching. And what was interesting was I had a lot of people who would come to me to learn the knife stuff later on, once I started actually offering NBC3 seminars and everything else. And they're like, you know, do you do empty hand stuff? It's like, yeah, of course I do empty hand stuff. You know, this is what I do for that. And the empty hand stuff had gone through the same logical evolution, the same analytical process. And they're like, wow, this is really cool. I want to learn this. And it's like, well, you know, I don't really teach that much. That's more for my personal use. The NBC stuff is what's unique, because you can find empty hand stuff anywhere. Same thing with stick. They were like, well, you know, the Filipino stuff, you have all this different stick technique. And it's like, well, this is what I do. I boiled it down to these techniques. And what ended up happening was NBC, the knife aspect of it, became what I was best known for, but it really was just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And there was a lot of other stuff that went through the same process, went through the same evolution, and offered the same benefits. But it's like, you know, when you go back and look at MTV, you know, music television. Now you look at MTV and there's no music videos on it. They actually changed their name from music television to MTV. It's the same thing with NBC. It's martial blade concepts, but yeah, we do empty hand, we do stick, we do gun, we do, you know, it's all there, but it's under the name of something that is associated with knives. So,
And what's the structure kind of like, so people can learn it? Do you do seminars? Do you have like study classes, other instructors available? How does it work?
So initially, when I first started teaching publicly, the very first major seminar I taught was actually for the Gun Sight Training Center in Arizona here. So famous firearms training center, and they invited me to be one of the instructors for an Edge Weapons Symposium back in 1998. And that was the first time that I sat down and kind of wrote out the curriculum that I was actually doing. And at that time, I had a few private students. We trained in my garage, and it was just something I did more for myself. I didn't really teach it publicly until I had that opportunity. And then I realized when people responded to the seminar well, they were interested in learning more, and I said, you know, hey, there's something to this. About a year after that, Sal Glesser, the founder of Spyderco, he had gone to Jim Keating's Riddle of Steel, and he came back and he said, you know, I want Spyderco to be able to offer edge weapon training. So he was working with one of Jim Keating's students here in Denver, and he decided that he was going to move up to Montana. So when he was leaving, Sal asked him, hey, is there anyone here who could take over the effort? And he recommended me. So I stepped in and started teaching what Sal called martial blade craft. He didn't want to call it knife fighting. He wanted to have a more politically correct term for it. So he called it martial blade craft. And I started teaching under Spyderco sponsorship, primarily just at the Spyderco location. So people would have to come to Spyderco to teach. That did okay for a couple years. Then we really didn't have the resources to advertise it very well. And some of the people who had come to Spyderco ran martial arts schools in other places. And they started inviting me saying, hey, would you be willing to come out to Ohio and do a seminar? Would you be willing to come to California and do a seminar? So the interest is really what kind of inspired me to start doing seminars on the road. I started traveling and teaching NBC for various folks. Pretty soon I established kind of a circuit where I would go back year after year to the same host. And then as the student body grew, I got more and more requests for, hey, how do I become an instructor in NBC? And at first I kind of held back. I didn't want to do that. But then I realized, if I don't create people who can share this, it's going to die with me. And the people who think they know it are not really going to know it very well. And then you're going to get this watered down bullshit version of NBC, 50 years from now. So I said, okay, if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And so I developed an instructor training program. So now when you look at, if you look at my website, martialbladeconcepts.com, you'll see an instructor locator. We've got instructors of various levels, fully certified instructors, associate instructors, affiliate instructors, and study group leaders. So various levels of NBC knowledge, but literally all over the world. So all over the US, and then we have people in, France, Switzerland, Germany, Japan, Canada. So a number of different countries. And that community continues to grow all the time.
Excellent. And again, for the listeners, I'll put a link to your website where people can find more information about that. So, and how is NBC structured? Do you have similar to what you have in traditional martial arts with belt levels, or is it more like you need to have a certain curriculum that you need to know? What's the structure?
We have an established curriculum. So I have a skills checklist that includes all the skills that you need to know. Yep. And the way that I present it, there are some people who say, hey, I want to learn how to use a knife to defend myself. Okay, great. You can learn as much as you think you need to know to feel confident in your skills. So we'll have some people who will come out and take a seminar, they'll come out and do a training camp or something like that, and they'll get what they believe is adequate for their needs. And that's fine. And they can train within the scope, that subset of the system if they want to. For the people who really want to get good at NBC, then we have a complete skills checklist, and that also is essentially the list of requirements if you wanted to become an instructor, if you wanted to pursue the testing process. And the way that it's built, it's a logical progression of skill. And one of the things that I focused on really heavily was being able to present common skills that had common ground, so that it made the system easy to learn. So when you think of traditional Filipino martial arts, the numbering system, so you'd have angle 1, angle 2, 3, 4, 5, all that kind of stuff. Most Filipino systems go up to 12 angles. Some have more than that. We stop at 5. And what we do is we basically look at it and say, okay, how do we use these angles to categorize any technique coming into us so that we can keep the system as simple as possible? Then what we do in the order of presentation, an angle 1 is a high forehand, and angle 3 is a low forehand. Those have more in common than an angle 1 and an angle 2. So we teach 1, then 3, because it makes it easier for the person to learn. They're able to take in the information more easily, be able to relate what they learned from the angle 1 to the angle 3, and they are able to develop skill much more quickly because you're teaching them in a way that makes more sense. And that's something that I've refined over the past 20 years that I've been teaching NBC. You get into a seminar and you teach it one way and you see everyone kind of standing around scratching their heads. You teach it another way, and all of a sudden the light bulbs go off and everyone is doing great. You realize, okay, I just figured out a better way to teach this. And that's something that I really focus on, is that ability to teach effectively. And literally the entire system is laid out with that logic in mind.
Yeah. And is that what you are doing now mostly as for the development of NBC, or are you still adding new techniques? And I'm asking because for me as an instructor, that's one of the things I'm doing the most now, is looking at, okay, how can I teach this better? It's less about, new techniques and so on. Some of the styles that I teach I've been doing for several decades. So there's not really new techniques that I'm learning anymore in that style. It's more about refining things that you already know, understanding better how they work together or not. what you can, but what you also shouldn't combine, tactical strategic applications, and so on. So it's more for me nowadays about structure as opposed to new techniques. Is that where you're at right now, or are you still looking at adding new stuff? Okay.
Yeah. So it becomes, what was interesting was initially when I started taking, for example, some of the reflex training drills, the flow drills from the Filipino martial arts, and adding those to NBC, what I realized over time was that some of those actually, although we were doing them because they were kind of traditional Filipino stuff and it's something that was well established, it didn't really serve the needs of what we wanted to learn. So you ended up with kind of this artificial element. And I've ultimately decided, you know what, I don't have a traditional Filipino lineage, so I don't have to do that.
Yep.
I deleted those drills. So we actually started paring things down and getting rid of technique. You know, one of the things you hear all the time in the self-defense community is it's another tool for your toolbox. You'll hear that phrase. I hate that phrase because I don't want a toolbox that weighs 500 pounds that I have to drag around. And then when I need a tool, I have to dig through hundreds of things to find the one thing that I need. You know, if you look at a handyman who's really skilled, he's got his tool belt with a small selection of tools, but he knows how to use all of them really well. And that's what we want. We want to have that ability to have a small skill set that's easy to learn, it's easy to retain with a minimum of training. And when you need a new tool, it's based on actual need versus the idea of, oh, my students are bored, so I'm going to come up with some new shit. And it's like, here, isn't this fun? So where that really is driven, in addition to NBC, we have the empty hand versus knife component, what we call counterblade concepts. So what we do with that is we look at videos of actual knife attacks. There's cameras all over the place these days. So, you know, you get up on YouTube or Live Leak or whatever, you can see videos of people actually getting attacked with knives. So what we do is analyze the patterns of the attacks because they tend to happen pretty much the same way over and over and over again. But if we see something that is different than that, if we see an attack where it's like, hey, we don't really have a good solution for that particular attack, and it seems like that is a threat that is becoming more common, then we go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we need to develop something to fit that. First thing we do is we look at the tools we already have and say, can I use what I already know to be able to deal with that attack? If I can't, then we start looking for something new and exploring a new skill set. But to do new stuff just to do new stuff really doesn't make sense. We want to make it as functional as possible and keep the skills as limited as possible.
That's great. And I've been doing a lot of work on violence analysis over my Patreon for this is the 5th year now that I'm doing that. And very similar to what you do, just look at an event that is captured on CCTV or on a cell phone or whatever, and ask some questions. Okay, what's going on here? What is going well? What is going wrong? And how can you apply this to your own training? And just that method alone is available to anybody. Like you said, you can find so many examples of that on the internet. And instead of staying at the outrage stage of like, oh my God, I can't believe this just happened. This is horrible. Like, okay, what can you learn from this? Right. Pretty much everybody that I know in any field, doesn't matter what it is, who is at a high level, will look at whatever incident that relates to what they're doing and say like, okay, I need to learn from this. As opposed to say, oh, this is nonsense or this never happens. It just did. You can see the video. How would you handle it? Knowing full well that there are no magic bullets and, there's never a guarantee when it comes to defending yourself. Things can always go wrong. But just having that mindset of do things like you said, it's not just finding a new solution, but starting with what I have right now. Everything that is in my tool belt right now, what can I do against this kind of situation? And in my experience, in many cases, it's a lot of the time about a little bit of a paradigm shift or reframing in your mind what you thought a specific technique was for. Like, wow, you can actually use it in this context too. You just have to adjust this and that and so on. And that's what fascinates me, even after all these years of training, is that just these discoveries that you still make. But you need to keep your mind open because otherwise it doesn't work.
One of my favorite phrases comes from our late friend, Bob Orlando. What it does is what it is.
Yeah.
So it becomes one of those things and that's one of the things that I try to emphasize too in my training, because it's like, you'll see people who train traditional martial arts. And this goes back to kind of the linguistic side too. Uke means to receive.
Yeah.
So when you look at traditional Japanese arts, whoever is on the receiving end of an attack, they're uke.
Yep.
Okay, well, when you translate uke as block, which is the way that it's typically translated linguistically, then it's like, oh, okay, it's blocking. So shuto uke, I'm blocking with the shuto. No, the entire movement is what's important. What it does is what's important, and you're on the receiving end of an attack. So you have to look at the full, what I call it, physiological potential. What can it do? Not what is it? And like you say, once you define something and you put those blinders on where it's only one thing, you miss a lot of opportunities, and you really miss the real value of your training, I think.
Yeah, my Tai Chi Chuan teacher, he said that everything means something. There are no wasted movements. And it's up to you to understand what the movement is. It's not up to you to say like, well, I don't really care about this because I don't know. So let's just skip it. Hold on for a minute. There might be a reason that you're missing, and try to figure it out. And if you've got a good teacher, obviously the explanation will be forthcoming, but you still have to do the work to actually then train.
That's the key. And that's one of the things that's missing. So it's one thing to say, okay, you have all these movements and everything means something. It's like, okay, great. So tell me at least one thing that this one movement means. And if your teacher can't provide that, that's one of the things that I've also focused on a lot is if I don't know what I'm doing, if there's a particular movement or something that I'm being taught, and I can't come up with any meaning for it, any application for it, then I'm not going to spend my time training it.
Yep.
Even if somebody says, oh, this is awesome stuff. Okay, great. You have to validate that to me. And that's one of the other things when you look at the way martial arts are taught now and kind of the culture right now, everyone has this sense of instant gratification. You need to give this to me right now. And in some cases, it makes it hard when you're teaching. The old school martial arts stuff was, I'm a black belt, you're a white belt, you listen, and when you're ready, I'll tell you. Well, I want to know now. No. 10 push-ups, okay? And it became that really rigid, disciplinarian thing where the black belt was in charge. Now it's like, well, okay, fine. You don't want to tell me where it is. Screw you. And I'm not going to be your student anymore. And you walk out. I think in a way that's good because it forces the instructors to be better instructors. You can't hide behind well, I don't really know what this movement is because my instructor never taught me, but that's all I've got. So I'm going to teach you and I'm going to make you suffer through the same crap that I did. Realistically, I think that everything you do should have meaning, and a good instructor should bring that meaning to you when you're ready. But that should be sooner rather than later, even if it's just a demonstration or an explanation or whatever else it might be. It's like, you're not ready to learn this, but this is what it does.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of, I teach traditional martial arts and self-defense systems, but also mixed martial arts, a public class. And this is one of the things that I use nowadays. I use a lot of fundamental drills to get basic technique ingrained as quickly as possible. And that's basically starting with a stand-up, just the basic punches and so on. And I've got a very specific system, which is comprised of 5 basic drills that teaches very, very specific things. And especially when a young guy comes along, and that's what I get a lot in my class, young kids being impressed by whatever Conor McGregor did in the octagon, or they see these UFC champions, they want to be like that, and they start practicing at home with friends and playing around, and they come in my class and I'm like, okay, it's not wrong what you're doing. It's just that there's a lot of stuff missing. And one of the things that you're missing most of all is context. There are reasons why Conor McGregor could fight the way he fights. One of them is that he's got actually, he's usually taller than his opponents with a longer reach. And when that isn't the case, we saw what happened a few weeks ago, or when he fought Nate Diaz. And so if you just mimic that, what you see without that context, it's not going to work. So you have to trust me that I am trying to help you learn something the right way so that in the long run, you get there. So, and I often get questions, well, I can't do this this way. Why can't I do it? Because that guy does that in his fights. I'm like, it's not wrong, but you have to have a foundation first. And that foundation needs to be set up in such a way that you can go the furthest possible in the training. as opposed to setting you up for what I call dead end streets, where you have to go back and learn from scratch because you messed it up, because you're too dependent on speed or power, or if you're a heavyweight, because you always use your size and so on. And that works up until the point where it fails, and then there's nothing left. That you've got nothing. So that's my question to you, kind of, Mike, is obviously, martial blade concepts, the entire program, what the evolution is from A to Z and so on. How do you handle questions like that when there's a new student and he saw maybe an older video of you where he shows something specific, and he's been training and he comes to your class or your seminar and he's doing that, you're like, hold on, don't do it that way. And in this case, he's going to say, but Mike, I saw you do it. So how do you kind of distill it down to the point where, okay, I know what comes next for you, and I know that you doing it this way you will end up in trouble a little bit. So how do you talk people through that?
Well, first of all, one of the things that I'm very clear about is that I always explain why I do things. So when people are in a class or something like that, it's like, how many people have had traditional martial arts training? You see some hands go up. It's like, okay, did you ever learn anything where you were doing a movement, but you had no idea what it was? Hands go up, and it's like, okay, great. We try not to do that. So when you see this, it's like, okay, what was it? Well, they never told me, but I had to do it over and over and over again. It's like, okay, great. Well, our approach is, if you don't know what it is, don't do it. And you see, people are kind of surprised at that. And it's like, yeah, it's very different than traditional martial arts. I said, also, we continue to learn, we continue to evolve. I said, because every martial art was created by somebody. So in somebody's brain, they came up with the idea of, okay, let's do it this way. And whatever that thought process was, that person is what created that stuff. So nothing came down from God. Nothing was, the clouds didn't open up and the sun shined down and it was carved on a rock or anything like that. It doesn't work that way. Some guy came up with it. So what that means is, if that person continued to learn through his or her lifetime, then the system should have gotten better. Okay? What that means is, you may think, hey, this is the best way to do this thing, and then you figure out a better way to do it. You say, you know what, I'm not going to go back to the old way because I just figured out something better. The system should improve at that point. The problem is, in the traditional martial arts, once that guy dies, then all of his students fight. Because in a lot of cases, what you'll have, the way I look at self-defense and martial arts and everything, you have, first of all, your physical attributes. So what do you have as far as what you bring to the body, bring with your body, your athleticism? Are you strong, fast, whatever it might be, flexible, all those things. Then you have skills. So whatever your actual skills are, your attributes kind of drive your skills. Then you have weapons, then you have mindset. So those are kind of the four pillars of what I consider. Like you were saying, you'll have guys who are big or fast or strong or whatever it might be. They're very athletic. So they get away with a lot of stuff, even though their skills are pretty limited. Guys who pick up weapons, of course, are more capable. Guys who are more confident because they have a better mindset are more capable. And ultimately, all these things, like, again, since we're kind of going back into history, you think of your old stereo with the equalizer, with everything. It's like, okay, let me tune this thing so whatever I get coming out of the speaker sounds great. That's what we're trying to achieve, is that ultimate goal of balancing these four elements to get that. Well, when it comes to the physical attribute side, one of the things I focus on is trying to make everybody capable of defending themselves. And I'll get people, for example, who come into a class and they'll say, okay, you teach two different things for this particular attack. And I'm like, yeah. Well, why is there two? There should only be one. And I said, well, there might be one that works best for you, but you're not my only student. I have to teach everybody. So like I'll teach, for example, if you're checking an angle for somebody attacking the lower right-hand portion of your body, being able to block either with the back of your forearm, which means that you have to bend down and turn, or you check with your palm instead. And they're like, well, this gives you a larger surface area. It's a stronger structure. It allows me to pass this across to the other side. It has so many advantages. That's a better technique. Why would we ever do the other version? I said, two answers: tall guys, fat guys. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, when you're tall, getting down there and being able to bend your knees and turn and get to that position doesn't work very well. You can't do it quickly. When you're fat, you can't do that. And I said, I have tall students, I have fat students, I have students who've had knee replacements and they can't do that. So I'm working within the physical limitations of what their bodies allow them to do. But as an instructor, I still need to give them good technique. So we have both. Well, this just works better. I want to be an instructor in NBC. I said, well, if that's your mindset, then you're disqualified from being an instructor because you don't give a shit about your students. You only care about teaching people like you. It's like a 4 foot tall, 300-pound person walks into a Taekwondo school. They're not going to do very well. Do a jump spinning back kick. No, it's not going to work. That's not a good system for that person because their physical attributes don't work well that way. So I look at it kind of in two ways. We first of all, I'm constantly looking to try to make the system better. So when somebody sees something that is, hey, this is 10 years ago, you were doing this. Yeah, we've gotten better since then. And this is exactly why I changed it from what we used to do to what we did. And these are the benefits. I explained that right up front. And I'll tell them, you've invested a lot of time getting good at what you did. And I appreciate that. I'm not going to tell you that it's wrong, but I'm going to tell you there is something better. And if you really want to make your expression of this stuff as functional as possible, consider training on the new stuff. You still have good skill, but it could be better. The other side of it is that I'll find limitations for people. I've trained people who have physical disabilities. I've trained people from, I think the youngest student we ever had was like 14 years old who was training with his dad, because they typically don't teach knife stuff to anyone who's a minor unless they have a parent with them. And I think our oldest student was mid-70s. So you have people of all different physical attributes. And sometimes they'll be like, I can't do this. This doesn't feel comfortable for me. Okay, let me figure out something that works better for you so you have a solution for that problem. Yep. And that's what drives me, is trying to not create a bunch of people who all fight the same, but instead taking one system and meeting the needs of a lot of different people by giving them usable skills that work for them.
Okay, it makes perfect sense. And in many ways, this is something that is also part of my story as a teacher, is that I used to be more along the lines of, I really enjoyed training. I trained hard, and I wanted to have students who were the same, being young and stupid, obviously. So, but over the years, I realized that, okay, it's not fair to my students because not everybody trains with the same motivation, with the same goals. So I started becoming a much better teacher as soon as I realized that. And like you said, okay, somebody who isn't as athletic as I am, how can I teach them what I'm doing right now? How can they become better at what we're doing here? And I think as a teacher, it's a challenge on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's the most rewarding thing for me as a teacher when you see somebody with clearly not a lot of, for instance, physical attributes, but they're getting better. Right. And they get to a point of competency where they can handle themselves, and you can see the light bulbs go off, and just like, I can do this. Yes, you can. You maybe have to work harder than somebody else, but you can get there. And that's very rewarding.
And that's one of the things, one of the sayings I have in NBC is that the operative word in self-defense is self.
Yeah.
So everybody's a little bit different. And when you have a system where it's like, okay, everyone's going to fight exactly the same, the system becomes more important than what you're trying to achieve for the individual.
Yeah.
So if you're really trying to serve your students, if they're, it's one thing if they're coming in, they say, okay, I want to do a kata competition or something like that. Well, yeah, then everybody, that you have a set standard of performance that everyone is trying to do, where that kata, that form is done perfectly. From a self-defense standpoint, it's outcome-based education. Can you not get hurt and hurt the other guy bad enough to go home safe?
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. And that varies from person to person. It varies as far as situation, what your resources are, and of course, what your physical attributes are.
Yeah. No, makes perfect sense. All right. I'm going to switch topics a little bit. So could you talk a little bit about your collaboration with Paladin Press? So for, again, we're getting older, Mike, as I have to keep giving context. So Paladin
Thanks for
Press was
reminding
one
me.
of...
I appreciate that one. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, I cheat. In my family line, we still have a lot of hair as we get older, so I look younger than I am, but yeah.
It's in a box in the closet.
So Paladin Press used to be one of the biggest and, in my opinion, one of the most important companies out there producing instructional material, whether it was books or videos and later DVDs and then downloadable video files on a wide variety of topics that were sometimes even considered forbidden. And there's a lot of fun stuff there. I became one of the Paladin Press authors many years ago, and they stopped operation a few years ago when Peter Lund, the founder, passed away, unfortunately. So how did you start working with Paladin Press? What was that like?
So if we kind of rewind to when I first got interested in knives and all that type of stuff. So this was mid-1970s. My instructor said, learn about knife fighting. So one of my training partners in ASP, he said, hey, have you heard of this magazine called Soldier of Fortune? I'm like, no, what is it? He's like, well, it's kind of wild. It's like mercenary stuff and everything else. It just started coming out. The Soldier of Fortune started publication in 1975. So looked around, finally found a place that sold Soldier of Fortune, bought a copy, and there was a Paladin Press ad. And in there was Complete Book of Knife Fighting by William Cassidy. So it's like, okay, this is a book on knife fighting. I'm going to order this. So started becoming a Paladin customer when I was 12, 13 years old and started ordering these books because nobody else had the information out there. And when you look at the Paladin catalog, especially back then, it's like, wow, there's some wild stuff in here. There's explosives, there's silencers, there's, you name it, just lock picking, all kinds of really esoteric, weird topics and everything. And it was fascinating. So I started ordering stuff from Paladin and became a regular customer, when I was, again, 12 or 13. And stayed on their mailing list, continued to build my library of Paladin books and everything over the years. And in 1992, I was living in Bangkok. And one of the things that I'd always been interested in was blowguns. So I'd gotten blowguns when I was a kid, had played with them, made different blowguns, made different darts and all that kind of stuff. But I could never find a book that actually addressed blowguns and taught you about them from start to finish. So when I was living in Asia, I was traveling to the Philippines, traveling to Malaysia, started to collect some of the traditional blowguns. And it's like, you know what? I probably know more about blowguns than a lot of folks out there. And I was writing professionally for my job with the government, so I had good writing skills. I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to send a letter to Paladin Press. I'm going to propose that I write a book on blowguns. And I sent it to them. They're like, wow, this is cool. There is no book out there. Here's, give us 2 sample chapters and an outline. I gave them what they needed. Approved. I got a contract, and I became a Paladin author. So that led to additional projects, a book on knife fighting, a video on balisong technique and everything else, and started to become established as an author with Paladin. And around that time was also getting tired of working for the government, wanted to get out of government service. And I was sending out resumes to different companies, other government agencies and everything else. And again, it was one of these things where it's like, the one thing that I've done that was kind of the most fun and the most satisfying when I contracted with Paladin and was able to do these projects, it was fun. I really liked it. And it's something that topics that I really enjoy and I'm really interested in versus a job that I happen to be good at. So I sent Peter Lund a resume and a cover letter. And I said, hey, I've been a Paladin customer since I was 12 or 13 years old. I'm a Paladin author now, and I'm looking for opportunities. These are the skills that I have to, that I can bring to bear. I have knowledge of a lot of different stuff in Paladin's realm. Do you have any opportunities available? And he actually faxed me back in the days when faxes, pre-email, faxed me back and he said, hey, we want to fly you out to Colorado and do an interview. Awesome. So they sent me a ticket, hopped on a plane, flew from Bangkok to Colorado. Peter picked me up and he said, what we're really looking for is somebody to work with Colonel Rex Applegate. Are you familiar with Colonel Applegate? And I'm like, yeah, I read Kill or Get Killed back when I was a teenager and taught myself how to point shoot with a BB gun based on the Colonel stuff. And he's like, okay, well, went through the interview process with Pater, went through the interview process with John Ford and the editorial folks. We all got along great. They felt that I was a good fit. But Pater said, Colonel Applegate's going to be the ultimate judge. Let's fly you back for the Soldier of Fortune convention, which is a couple months after that. I want you to meet the Colonel. I want you to spend the weekend with him and help him out. And if he likes you, you're good to go. So came back out, met the Colonel, spent the weekend with him. He grilled me, asked me a bunch of questions and everything. We got along great. And he told Pater, yeah, I can work with this guy. And that's what gave me the opportunity. So I quit my government job. At that time, I was living in Hawaii already the second time. Moved from Hawaii to Colorado and basically started Paladin's video production department in 1994.
That's a hell of a ride. And I'm going to hold off for the Colonel Applegate questions because I've got those ready for the bonus segment we'll do for my Patreon. No, just what I wanted to say is that, I mean, it's obviously for a lot of people, like you, I also was a Paladin Press customer, and back in the day, I've never had it confirmed, but the rumors were, and they're not unlikely to be true, that our national security agency was actually monitoring who was buying what from Paladin Press, because it had to be imported from the US over here, and they had a keen interest in knowing who was trying to acquire certain knowledge. But again, back in the pre-internet days when you didn't get any information about, homemade explosives and firearms and stuff like that, is that wasn't available freely.
Yeah, it was, it really was forbidden knowledge. And what was interesting was, I'd seen Pater on like some of the news shows and everything here in the US. So like there used to be a show called 2020 and they did an interview with him. And Pater was, larger than life character, very, very outspoken as far as his stuff, but super, super nice, super generous guy. But he also had specific limits as far as what he would publish and what he believed in sharing and what he didn't. So I remember when I was interviewing with him, I stayed at his house. So we're hanging out at his house and he's like, okay, I'll pour your first drink. After that, you're on your own. Bar is right there. Ice is right there. It's like, okay, great. So we're sitting there drinking into the wee hours of the morning, and he's like, "Do you have any questions for me?" And I said, "Yeah. What won't you do as far as Paladin is concerned?" And he's like, "I've got two rules: nothing on poisons, and nothing on altitude-sensitive bombs."
Yeah.
And those are basically the two things that he said, "Not going to go there." And I said, "Well, Lumpanix does a thing on poisons." He's like, "Yep," and that's one of the Lumpanix titles that we won't sell. Yeah. He said, it's a personal line that I won't cross. And, he was very principled in his own way. There's a lot of stuff that he published that was way out there. But there was also, specific things where he felt, that's irresponsible. There's nothing good can come of that. So I'm not going to do it.
And it's a fine line, and I've had that question many times over the years myself, and I'm guessing you too. And it comes to the responsibility of the teacher or the author is what do you share and what you don't share. And just recently, I was interviewing somebody else, and we were talking about that. I said there's things that I don't teach that I know how to do, but I don't teach some of the psychological aspects of how to prepare yourself for certain things. I don't teach it because if you get this wrong, you're messing somebody up real bad, like getting institutionalized at worst, or they end up so messed up they take their own life. So you don't cross those lines. And I don't know if you can talk about that, but I'm sure you've had a fair number of proposals from people that wanted to do something for Paladin Press that you're like, no, we're not going to do that. This is just silly, or this is way too out there. Is there anything you can say without naming names, obviously?
Oh, yeah. Well, we used to get proposals all the time. So we would have people who would call up or write in, or, once we got email, they'd send an email and it's like, hey, I want to do a video on this. And it'd be like, okay, here's the rules. You need to have a written outline, and we want to have a sample of you teaching on video. It doesn't have to be anything that has, high production value or anything like that, but it's just you being comfortable in front of the camera and get a feel for your teaching style. So in many cases, we had people who just were not very good instructors. So they would get up there and they were just terrible as far as what they were teaching. But in other cases, we had people who was like, this is the self-defense system that I came up with last week. And, this is awesome and you can beat anybody and, here you go. And it just sucked. It's interesting. I don't know if you want me to name names at all, but
it's up to you. It's okay. Whatever you want to do is fine by me.
One of the things, so like with Paladin, we had some people who would look at Paladin Press and they'd say, I don't know if I want to work with you guys because you've got all this wild explosive stuff and lock picking and everything else. I'm a martial artist. I don't know if I want to be associated with all that. I'm like, okay, I understand. I respect that. At the same time, we have very well-established, very well-respected martial artists who've worked with us. It's your choice. But we also had, like, one of the things when I came on board with Paladin, because I was the only person in the editorial staff, so among all the book editors, and of course I was the video guy, I was the only one who really had any martial arts experience, had any knowledge of the martial arts side of things. So when we would get book proposals from people, it was kind of the same thing, a written outline and a couple sample chapters. When we get the book proposals, if the editorial department didn't know, hey, is this any good or not? Is this worth pursuing? They would pass it on to me for my consideration.
Okay, sorry about that, Mike. My internet just totally crapped out. I don't know what the hell's going on. So let me see.
Yeah, you froze up and then I just lost your connection altogether.
Yeah, all of a sudden it just shut down. My Zoom shut down. It's still recording. It happens sometimes. So okay. You were saying that, the department...
I'll just back up to the last point. So I'd asked about naming names. So this is going to be a specific story, but it is what it is. So when I came on with Paladin, I was one of the only person really on the editorial staff who had any martial arts experience, any knowledge of a lot of stuff. So when we would get proposals, either book or video proposals, in a lot of cases, they would come to me because if the editorial staff didn't know, hey, is this worth pursuing? Here's this martial art Penjak Silat. I've never heard of this. And it's like, well, you should have, but a lot of that stuff would come to me. Well, one of the things when it came to kind of the respectability and guilt by association, I guess, of being associated with different authors, one that always caused me some concern was Ashita Kim.
Yeah.
So when I came on board there, I was doing research because, again, being an analyst, I'm looking to see what sells well and all this other kind of stuff. And when I first started doing videos, I don't know if you remember back in the day, the Paladin catalog used to have a centerfold, and we would do an article in the centerfold.
Yep.
So I did an article, and I basically said, hey, we now have in-house video production, and what we're looking for is established Paladin authors or anyone else who has a great idea. Approach us. We'd like to work with you, all that kind of stuff. And I got a very angry phone call from Ashita Kim that basically said, how dare you reach out to anybody else? I'm Paladin's best author, and you should be coming to me first. I'm very insulted and all this other kind of stuff. And I said, no offense intended, with all due respect, we're trying to be as equitable as possible, trying to be, fair to everybody. So everyone has to go through the same process. We know you're well established with your books and stuff like that, but here we go. So he sent me some videos, and I watched the videos, and they were just ridiculous. They were terrible. And I figured, okay, I want to try to give this guy, because he made money for Paladin. His books sold well despite their quality. And I said, I want to try to be as fair as possible. So I went into the reference library and I saw other Ashita Kim stuff there. There's a VHS tape. So I pulled out this VHS tape, pulled the tape out, and in the sleeve was a business card for the Black Dragon Fighting Society. And I'm like, that's Count Dante. That's John Kean, the Count Dante Dim Mak, all the bullshit stuff you would see in the comic books and the cheesy martial arts magazines back in the 70s. And I saw this, and then I started looking at the Yoshida Kim stuff, and he was teaching Kata Dante, which was Count Dante's famous, sequence of whatever 29 moves or whatever the hell it was. But everything that was being portrayed under Yoshida Kim's teaching was ninjutsu. And it's like, well, wait, that's not ninjutsu, because around this time you also had Stephen K. Hayes doing Togakuri Ryu ninjutsu, and we're actually starting to get visibility on what real ninjutsu was like and everything else. And I said, here you have a guy who basically has duped Paladin into believing that the Black Dragon Fighting Society stuff, which he was not heir to, he basically repackaged that and sold it to Paladin as ninjutsu. And I went to Pater and I went to the editorial director and I said, this is wrong. And they were like, well, this stuff sells really well and he's really well established with our customers and all this. So long story short, I kind of made it a point of reminding them of that every chance I got. I told Yoshida Kim we were not going to do any videos with him. He was very insulted. Started calling back using different voices, trying to order Yoshida Kim videos and everything. And it was just ridiculous. And he finally got so pissed off that he started being very belligerent to Pater, started making threats. And basically at that point, Pater said, okay, fine, screw it. Let's cut him off. So we definitely had some characters that were working for Paladin Press as authors. And we got a lot of stuff. We used to call them TNTs, thanks, no thanks. So when you write a TNT letter, it's like, after careful consideration, we've decided that, blah, 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 blah. Realistically, we accepted, as far as videos that we would produce with Paladin, I can only speak from the video side because I didn't have full visibility on the book side. I would say probably 2 to 3% of the proposals we got, we actually made into finished videos. 97 to 98% were declined.
Wow, I didn't know it was that bad, actually. Phew. I'm very happy then that I actually made the cut. I remember making my sample video for you guys back in the day in my class long time ago. I actually stumbled upon them a few months ago, and I looked at myself like, wow, that's a long time ago. Time flies. Actually, I mean, to complete your story, it's funny. I interviewed a friend of mine, Don, who lives in Japan for many years, speaks Japanese, has the highest certificate, the rank of translator from the Japanese government. And he trained for many years in ninjutsu over there with one of the students of Hatsumi Sensei, training with Hatsumi Sensei. And he's very vocal, obviously, in the ninjutsu community, because we have exactly that thing we just mentioned, that somebody's claiming to be teaching ninjutsu. Who's your teacher? Well, it's this kind of secretive guy. He doesn't like to have his name thrown around, but in Japan. Okay, so what's his name? Tell us, and where is he? And then they have a made-up name that doesn't make any sense. Then he says, like, that's not a Japanese name. That doesn't even sound Japanese. Like, what are you talking about? I would say it's a big problem in ninjutsu, but I'd be lying, because it's in all martial arts. I do Chinese martial arts. The number of idiots, crazy guys, and self-aggrandizing narcissists that I've encountered is probably just as high, that number, as in the ninjutsu field.
I got a proposal one time from a guy who was 29 years old and claimed to be a 10th degree black belt.
Awesome.
Well, and his title was Soke Doctor Grandmaster.
That's a good one.
Are you a DJ or a martial artist?
Soke Dr. Grandmaster. Yeah. My kids call me Demon Overlord. I think that's a better title. I like that. And I say Demon Child number 1 and number 2. I always like that. Maybe I should put that on some stationery or something.
I like it.
All right.
Baseball cap.
Yeah. Something with horns, probably.
Yeah, there you
go. Switching topics again, could you talk a little bit about Stay Safe Media?
So Stay Safe kind of starts with, if we go back to Paladin Press. So when I first started editing video for Paladin, Mike Rigg, who's the founder of Stay Safe, he was actually selling video equipment. He was in professional video sales. So when I went to look for camera equipment and an edit suite and everything, Mike is the guy who sold me all that stuff. Paladin always kind of operated on a humble budget. So when I'd been using the editing equipment for a number of years, it started having some issues and everything, and I would keep going to Mike for technical support, and he's like, you know what, we don't even sell that editing equipment anymore, but tell you what, let me take a smoke break and I'll walk you through how to fix it. So he was always very supportive, even when professionally he wasn't required to be anymore. So he and I ended up becoming friends because of that. Ended up selling me better video equipment later on, and then Mike was looking for a career change, and he'd been to Paladin several times to set up my edit suites and to work on equipment and stuff. And he's like, you know, this seems like a really cool corporate environment. And I'm like, yeah, it's a great place to work. And he said, you know, I'm looking for opportunities. And long story short, I introduced him to Peter. Peter offered him the job in the marketing side of things, and Mike became basically one of the marketing professionals for Paladin. So he worked for Paladin for a number of years. When I got an opportunity to work for the Bastards of Defense Knife Company and Blackhawk Products Group, I left Paladin in 2004. When I left, Mike took over as video production manager, as well as continuing to do his stuff as the marketing guy. And he was basically kind of running both departments. Peter was looking at that time for an opportunity to retire. Actually, several months before I left Paladin, he called together kind of all the department heads. So it was about 5 of us. And we went out to lunch, and he said, you know, hey, I've got something I want to talk to you about. It's like, okay, great. He's like, I want to retire. I want to continue to draw a salary from Paladin. So here's my proposal. You guys pay me this much every year. You guys run the company, and basically you each put in $1 million, and you own 1/5 of Paladin. And I'm like, I don't have $1 million. No. It was really kind of a ludicrous thing, and I don't know what he was drinking or smoking when he came up with that. But anyway, obviously that plan didn't work. But what Peter came up with later on was you had Gene Vaughn, who was in charge of the customer service side. And then you had Mike, who was running marketing and video production. And Peter said, you know what? You're the two who are going to kind of take over. I'm going to step back. You guys run the company. And ultimately, over time, what they did was actually sign an agreement where the company would change ownership to their ownership over, I think it was a 15-year period or something like that. The only problem was Peter never told anyone else in the company what he was doing. So when Mike and Gene started trying to run the company and tell people what to do, there were some people in the company who didn't get it, didn't want to get it, and they're like, I don't work for you, I'm not going to do that. And it ended up being a lot of friction. Mike's temper got the worst of him, and he basically started getting mad at people who wouldn't do what they were told. Peter came back and fired Mike, which was unfair to him. It was unfair. It was just poorly thought through all the way around as far as Peter was concerned. But Mike was like, you know what, I really enjoy video production. By this time, Mike had already been training with me for several years. He was training NBC. I actually was teaching out of Paladin's basement. Our weekly classes were in the basement of Paladin, even after I left and went to work for Blackhawk. And I still had a good relationship with Peter. Everything was good. Once he let Mike go, things really changed a lot. So I used to have a key to Paladin. I had free access to the company because I was, Peter and I were still very close. And basically, he started putting up doors, locking doors, kind of compartmentalizing us as far as what we had access to and everything else, because he was mostly pissed at Mike, not so much pissed at me. But Mike was like, you know what, I want to continue to do video production, and I'd like your help. And I said, okay, well, I'll try to help out as best I can. Let me sort things out. Well, Dave Dubrow, who you work with,
yeah.
I trained Dave to do his job, and he ended up taking over the video production department. When I went to Peter and I said, okay, how do we stand now with regard to you having fired Mike? Peter was basically like, well, I talked this over with Dave, and Dave doesn't want to work with you. I'm like, well, that's interesting, because I've been consulting for Paladin. I was still consulting and helping them out after I left. And I said, when you look at all of my titles combined, my revenue as an author, I was the #5 top selling author, just because I had a lot of titles in print. And I said, for your video production guy to refuse to work with me when obviously a valuable asset to the company, that's insulting, and it's not a very good business decision. And he's like, well, you chose to leave. I'm going to stand by Dave, and that's the way it works. And I said, okay, I guess I don't have the opportunity to work with you anymore. I have 2 videos in the can with you guys that we've already shot. I want possession of that footage. And basically, I guess we're done as far as our relationship. And long story short, Peter kind of kicked me to the curb as a Paladin author. Said I was no longer welcome to work with the company. He said I could write books, but I couldn't do videos with Paladin. And I said, well, video is what's most demonstrative for the stuff that I teach. So essentially, Mike and I went into partnership initially with Stay Safe, and the idea was to that would be my outlet as an instructor as far as video production goes, and I would be Mike's primary author as far as him as a publisher. And we built Stay Safe initially. We didn't have any product to sell, so I was still editing videos for Paladin to help them out, because once I left Paladin, I said, I don't want to leave you guys in a difficult situation where you don't have product to offer. So I took one of the edit suites home, and I was editing on my own time and basically doing it under contract for them. So I did that for a year. I took that year's worth of earnings and I bought Paladin products that I gave to Mike, and I said, okay, here's your initial inventory. Start selling stuff and start feeding your family. So that was my investment in the company. And basically, we ran Stay Safe as partners for a number of years. I withdrew from the partnership about 3 years ago or so, and Stay Safe just closed down at the end of 2020. Mike retired and decided to close the company.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know about that. I thought they were still going. Okay. All right. That's yeah. Video production and the self-defense world, the martial art world, and gun world, it's the Wild West in many regards still today. I mean, a lot of stuff that you just mentioned, I wasn't aware of. I didn't even know. I knew some of the background, obviously, having heard some stuff left and right. But there's a lot of stuff that you just mentioned that I was not aware of at all. The way I see it is this. I got my first big break at becoming a little bit better known thanks to Paladin Press, and that was in many regards thanks to Lauren Christensen, who took me under his wing many years ago. Introduced me to Paladin Press and the folks there. And I mean, we met at a certain point at Paladin Press. I remember coming down to one of those training sessions, having a lot of fun and having a hard time keeping up. And it was great working with everybody there. There's some stuff that I could say. I mean, like Peter was indeed a larger than life character. I mean, one of the first things he said to me is like, if you got a problem with anybody else, you come to me, okay? Not like one of those guys. And he gets off into this rant. I'm like, okay, yes, sir. Or he I mean, the last time I think one of no, not the first, but I think the second time when I came to the studio, he was walking to his car in the parking lot. I'm walking in. Hi, where am I, Peter? And so what do you think about the European Union? I'm like, maybe another time, Peter. I gotta go shoot a video. Yep. So yeah, special kind of guy. I have a lot of fond memories, but then again, I never worked with him that closely, so I can understand. I see some of the things you said that, like, yeah, that sounds like Peter.
It's interesting because you mentioned YouTube earlier. So what had ended up happening was, again, we were down in the Paladin basement. I was running my weekly classes there, and YouTube was just starting to become a thing. And I had some questions from some of my students, because I also have a closed forum for NBC students. So I had some questions, and I said, you know what, I should do a YouTube video, and that way I can just throw something out there. Everyone can see it. It's easier than trying to send out DVDs or anything like that. So we started doing a few YouTube videos in the basement. And of course, YouTube is just, you put it up there, it's free. Nobody, unless you Now with ads and all that kind of stuff, you can make money, but they're not commercial videos. You're not charging anyone. Well, Pater didn't know what YouTube was. Dave basically went to Pater and said, Mike is using the basement as a video studio, and he's producing videos and he's selling them. And Pater is like, hey, I gave him an opportunity to have a place to train. I didn't give him a video studio to produce commercial videos to compete with Paladin. And he basically sent me a letter and he said, you need to get all your stuff out of the basement. As of this date, you're no longer welcome there. And I called up and I said, hey, Peter, I'd like to talk to you. And his secretary's like, oh, he's not available. So what I did was I printed off a picture of the video studio that Mike Rigg and I had rented to shoot the Stay Safe videos. And it's like, this is a production shot of us producing something for Stay Safe. This is a YouTube video shot in the basement. Had those two pictures and a bottle of scotch, and basically drove up to the building and went up to the secretary and I said, I'd like to speak to Pater. And Pater had seen me coming in. He walked out the back door, got in his car and drove away. So I went up to his desk, put the bottle of scotch there, and I said, thank you very much. I'll pull all my stuff out of the basement by this date. But just for your record, this is our studio, this picture, this is your basement. Two totally different things. We're not making commercial videos in your basement, and you've been misinformed. But
yeah, it's like I said, the Wild West sometimes. I mean, I clashed with Paladin Pros a few times, mostly on price. The price of the videos that I thought was way too high. The books as well, their position on Amazon, seeing Amazon as the enemy as opposed to using them. I begged for years to lower the price of my products, but it never happened. My heavy bag training video, that was actually part one. We shot part two, which was the main point of shooting the Padman, Padman. The main point of shooting part one was to be able to do part two, which was actually the meat of the instructional material. They didn't bring it out because part one didn't sell enough, according to them, and then eventually one time somebody threw the original recordings of part two away. They destroyed it. And when they stopped operating, I asked about it. I said, could you please send me that? Because I've been waiting for years to bring this out. It's gone. I was like, God damn it. It's like, I mean, it's
so sorry to hear that. It's
stuff like that I haven't talked about that publicly. And one of the main reasons is that obviously, like I said, I acknowledge the things that Paladin Press did for me and everybody there. And my working relationship was usually pretty good. It's not that, but as with all business decisions and business relationships, sometimes you end up in these positions where it's either competing interests or a different vision on how things should be done, let alone personal conflicts and stuff like that. That's life. I mean, in any business and in any endeavor, you risk having that. And then, what you did is you're like, okay, I'm going to just make a decision and this is how I'm going to move forward. And then you move on and you do your own thing.
Yeah, but it's when I was hired by Paladin, when I went through the interview process and everything, one of the things they kept emphasizing over and over again was we have a very specific culture, and people who we let into our culture have to get along with everyone else. And I'm like, okay, great. I know how to work with different people and everything, and I really took that to heart. As Pater started spending more time in the UK, because he also maintained a home there, they started hiring people who really didn't get that message and were not team players. And that, I think, really changed the corporate culture of Paladin a lot. So you had people who just, they weren't nice people. They weren't easy to get along with. They weren't the type of people who appreciated what Paladin did and what the opportunity was to work there. Instead, they let their personal agendas and their personalities take over. And that, I think, was really the downfall of the company. That and the internet.
Yeah. I think that Paladin Press had such a catalog of books and videos that they could have done really well on the internet. And I remember how long it took for just a web shop to start online. It took forever. The downloads, I mean, how long did it take before there was a downloadable video library that was available for purchase? I've been fortunate in that many of my oldest clients have been working as a personal trainer for 26, 27 years now. Many of them were in the financial technology or in the IT industries. And I managed to learn a lot from them and really quickly saw that, okay, the internet, this is a thing, and you have to jump on that train because you'll be left behind. And in many ways, I always had this feeling like Paladin Press could have been, I mean, they could have been huge had they embraced that instead of what I think actually was fighting it.
But it took me a long time to get Peter to do DVDs.
Yeah.
So when DVDs were replacing VHS, I said, we need to, really embrace this and we need to work on it. And he's like, well, it's probably just a passing thing. And I'm like, no, this is the future. Just really resistant. He did not get technology very well. And he was very, very stubborn in that regard.
No, it's too bad. And then I was very sad to see that I mean, Paladin Press just stopped working as opposed to being taken over by somebody or another company. It just, that was it. It was done.
Yeah, and with very little notice.
Yeah. I remember getting that letter. Yep. It's like, okay, thank you, and we're done. We're closing shop. I'm like, holy crap, what happened?
Yeah, what was interesting for me was I was actually shopping in Walmart here a number of years ago, and after Peter had actually fired Dave, walking around in Walmart, and this guy walks up to me and he's like, hi, you don't know me, but I'm Paladin Press's video producer. And I'm like, oh, hi, I heard about you because I still had some friends at Paladin and everything. So, shook his hand and, it's like, nice to meet you. And he's like, it's really nice to meet you because I was led to believe one thing about what you did and all this other kind of stuff. He says, but I've gone through everything in Paladin's records. I looked at all your old letters. I looked at everything that you did. I looked at the equipment you bought and everything else. He says, the stuff that you did was awesome. And I'm like, oh, thanks, And he's like, I was really misled about who you were. Okay. Well, when Paladin was getting ready to close, he called me and he said, I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but there's going to be some stuff going on. And he's like, if you don't have copies of your DVDs, if you don't have copies of your stuff, you might want to buy them now. And he actually gave me a heads up, and I was able to at least get archival copies of all my old Paladin stuff and be able to have that so that I can still try to make it available.
Yeah, it's a wild world. I mean, when Turtle Press went closed shop, basically they asked for money for me to get my my manuscripts back. They asked for $500 per manuscript. I had 2 books that I did together with Lauren with them, and they're like, "Okay, we're closing, and that's your one back. Here you go." Yep. That included original pictures, because that back in the day it was like developing pictures and sending them. I had the negatives, fortunately, but it was just insane. I was like, come on, guys. I mean, but they were in. I mean, what was I going to do? Sue them from all the way from Belgium, a company that is closing shop?
Right.
It's a lose-lose scenario. So, like I said, it's the Wild West. People have no idea everything that's happened in this industry. The reader, the listener, the people watching the videos. Maybe it's best that they don't know. Anyway, I interrupted you. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say my very first video production experience was with Panther Productions back in 1992, and it was through a guy that I worked with named Jim Webb, who I learned later on was not what he appeared to be either. But flew from Bangkok to Los Angeles for the video shoot, and they said, oh yeah, when you get here we'll reimburse you for airfare and all that kind of stuff. And Joe Jennings, who is the head of Panther, he's like, well, I'm sorry, that's just not in the budget right now. So the way I started my video career was to eat the airfare, round trip airfare from Bangkok to Los Angeles. So he said, if you're interested in any videos or anything, I'm happy to let you. I'm like, okay, great. I grabbed the shopping cart and started loading Panther videos. And he's like, hey, whoa, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to get to the point to where I can pay for my airfare. I went home from that trip with an entire suitcase full of Panther videos.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why so many instructors nowadays, like you and me, and a host of others who did come up through, let's call it the old system. You've got your own company, you've got your own setups, you sell your own stuff. I self-publish a lot of my own books and videos. Now I've got my own platform for my online Tai Chi. I'm doing everything I own it. And I have originals of everything. If for whatever reason some company is messing with my stuff, or it changes management, or it's bought up by some other company and they changed the way they do business, I can pack up and leave, and I will, because once bitten, twice shy, and I've been bitten more than once, so I'm extremely shy in that regard.
Well, also the technology now allows you to do that yourself.
Exactly.
Print on demand. Video production, everything else. It's just so much easier. Back then the publishers had everyone by the balls because, they were the only ones who had the resources. Yeah.
So speaking of, what's next for you? What are you doing? You plan any plan? That you can talk about new stuff coming out, new material?
My primary focus right now, I have a distance learning program for Martial Blade Concepts. And right now, it has about 62 hours of content, so lots of content. We're adding new stuff every month. So I've got a community of people who are connected to NBC through that, and that allows me to reach out for people who don't have instructors in their area.
Yep.
I'm able to share information with them. And Mike Rigg was helping me with that when he was, running Stay Safe. Since he's retired, basically getting back into the editor's chair and doing the video production side of all that stuff, as well as being in front of the camera. And that's really what I'm focusing on, is just continuing to offer that information and really trying to develop that community.
Awesome. Well, we're going to start wrapping up the first part before we get to the bonus episode on Patreon. Where can people reach you, Mike? Well, could you give us some URLs, some website stuff?
The best place to go is martialbladeconcepts.com. So martial like martial arts, blade like knife, concepts.com. And also, if you want to go straight to where all of the downloadable digital videos are located, martialbladeconcepts.tv. MartialBladeConcepts.com. It has the instructor locator. It has information about all the different videos, has my seminar schedule and everything else. That really is kind of the core of things. Also up on Facebook and Instagram under Martial Blade Concepts as well. So those are the best places to look.
Excellent. All right. Before we close off this part of the podcast episode, anything you want to add, Mike? Any thoughts?
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much. It's, I always regretted that I never had the opportunity to really work with you when I was with Paladin. Love your material, love what you do. And it's great that we've been able to stay connected, even though it's been sporadic over the years and everything. But I have great respect for what you do, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here and to share some of my background with your audience. So thank you.
Oh yeah, it's right back at you, Mike. Same thing. Love the stuff that you do. I actually still have my one of your few of your books on how to make a mukyong back at home. The practical knife course. It's all like a few feet away from me in my library. So been tracking your stuff for a long time as well.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you.
Really great. All right, folks, we are going to head on over to the Patreon. So I'm going to say goodbye to you all. And again, all the links will be in the show notes, all the links that we mentioned. So you can directly go there and click on the link and get in touch with Mike that way. Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.